Good morning, students. Today we are going to learn about a new chapter of the history part, and the chapter number is chapter 7. And our topic of the chapter is new ideas. So, I'll be explaining with the help of the animation. First, in today's, let's watch the animation, and in the live classes, I will try to explain you in the very broadly. So do attend the live class and come in the live class. I will clear all your concept there, and also I'll be sending the recording of the live classes in the YouTube. So let's begin the animation part.
Upanishads. Upanishads literally mean approaching and sitting near, or in other words, to sit near somebody. They are a record of knowledge given by teachers to pupils sitting near them. The Upanishads are a set of books written in the form of dialogues or debates between the teachers and disciples. They are a storehouse of Indian philosophy. They are also regarded as the sacred knowledge or divine revelation and are thus called the Vedanta. Around this time, thinkers tried to find answers to difficult questions. Some of them wanted to know about life after death. Others felt that there was something permanent in the universe that would last even after death. They described this as the Atma or the individual soul and the Brahma or universal soul. They believed that the individual soul, Atma, was not separate from the universal soul. These and other such ideas are recorded in the Upanishads. Most Upanishadic thinkers were men, especially Brahmins and Rajas. Occasionally, there is mention of women thinkers such as Gargi, who was famous for her learning and participated in debates held in royal courts. There is also mention of an ordinary thinker named Satyakama Jabala, who was the son of a slave woman Jabali. He had a deep desire to learn about reality and became one of the best-known thinkers of the time. Many of the ideas of Upanishads were later developed by the famous thinker Shankaracharya, about whom you will study in next class. Indeed, the philosophy of Vedanta, drawn from Upanishads, has been elaborated upon by many thinkers belonging to India and other countries. Jainism. The founder of the Jainism religion was Rishabdeva, who spread his message around several thousand years ago. The followers of this religion are called Jains. They believe that Mahavira was the last of 24 Tirthankaras or religious teachers. Mahavira was born in 540 BCE in a village near Vaishali in Bihar. He was a Kshatriya prince of the Licchavis, a group that was part of Vajji Sangha. He belonged to a royal family and was married to a girl named Yashoda. However, he was not interested in the life of a householder. At the age of 30, he became an ascetic. During the next 12 years, he went to live in a forest and led a hard and lonely life. At the age of 42, he attained the highest spiritual knowledge or enlightenment. He propagated his religion for 30 years, wandering at different places. He passed away at the age of 72 at a place called Pavapuri near Rajagriha. Trivia. While meditating, Bhagwan Mahavira was bitten by a deadly snake. Still, he did not develop any kind of hatred for the snake and kept meditating. After 12 years, he attained divine knowledge and self-realization. His perception about everything was crystal clear, and he paved the way for spiritual pursuit for future monks. The attainment of this spiritual knowledge was known as Keval Gnana. Teachings of Mahavira. Mahavira stressed on three things: right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct. These three teachings were called Triratna or three jewels. He taught his followers not to steal, not to speak lies, and not to kill any living being. He laid great emphasis on non-violence. He believed that a person's position in life depends on karma, action, of the previous life, and that anyone, even a low-born person, could attain moksha. He called upon his followers to lead good and pure lives. Jain men who gave up worldly life were not even allowed to wear clothes. Later on, some Jains took to wearing white clothes. He did not discuss God and rejected all rituals. Mahavira won many followers as he preached in Prakrit, the language spoken by common people, instead of Sanskrit, the language of the priests. For centuries, the teachings of Jainism were transmitted by word of mouth. Finally, they were written and compiled in a place called Vallabhi in Gujarat. It was very difficult for most men and women to follow the strict rules advocated by Mahavira. Nevertheless, thousands left their homes to learn and teach this new way of life. Many more supported those who became monks and nuns, provided them with food. Jainism was supported mainly by traders. Farmers found it more difficult to follow these rules as they had to kill insects to protect their crops. Over hundreds of years, Jainism spread to different parts of North India and to Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. Buddhism. Siddhartha, Gautam Buddha, who was later known as, was a contemporary of Mahavira. He was born in 563 BCE in Lumbini forest near Kapilavastu in the foothills of Nepal. He belonged to a small Gana known as the Shakya Gana and was a Kshatriya. Initially, he led a life of luxury. He was married to Princess Yashodhara and had a son named Rahul. According to legend, the sights of an old man, a sick man, and a dead man made Gautama realize that there is suffering in the world. The sight of an ascetic told him that there is also a way to end suffering. He left the comforts of his home at the age of 30 to find the way to end suffering. He wandered for several years, meeting and holding discussions with other thinkers. He finally decided to find his own path to realization and meditated for days on end under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar, where he attained enlightenment and became known as the Buddha, the Enlightened One. Buddhist monks. He delivered his first sermon at Sarnath near Varanasi. He spent the rest of his life traveling on foot, preaching in the common man's language as he wanted the message to reach everyone. He passed away at the age of 80 in 483 BCE at Kushinagar in eastern Uttar Pradesh. Teachings of Buddha. Buddha advocated that our present actions, karma, whether good or bad, affect us both in this life and the next. He said that people suffer on account of their desire. If they conquer desire, then they can attain nirvana or freedom from the cycle of birth or rebirth. To overcome desire, Buddha advised his disciples to follow the middle path, that is, neither to give up all worldly possessions nor to live in luxury. He taught people to be kind and to respect the lives of others, including animals. He recommended an eightfold path, Ashtangika Marg, for his followers. The teachings of this path are right observation, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right determination, right exercise, right memory, and right meditation. He preached equality of all human beings and rejected the caste system as well as religious rituals. He forbade lying, stealing, killing, and drinking. Buddhist teachings are in Pali and are compiled in 3 Pitikas, 3 baskets. One Pitika contains rules for the monks, the other contains Buddha's sermons, and the last contains Buddha's thoughts. After the death of Buddha, Buddhism got divided into 2 sects, Mahayana, the followers of which considered Buddha as God, and Hinayana, who considered Buddha as a religious teacher. Sangha. Both Buddha and Mahavira set up organizations called Sangha for those who gave up worldly life and became monks in order to attain enlightenment. Those who joined the Sangha, or the formal religious orders, were called bhikshus because they survived on alms. A woman could join the Sangha with the permission of her husband. Similarly, slaves and servants had to seek the approval of their masters before joining the Sangha. The members of the Sangha hailed from the varied castes, communities, and professions. They had to strictly follow Buddha's teachings and lead simple lives. They meditated for most of the time and went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. They also held meetings to settle any quarrels that took place within the Sangha. Monasteries. Both Buddhist and Jain monks did not stay at one place for long as they wandered from one place to another. However, during rainy season, when it was difficult to travel, they stayed in temporary shelters built by their supporters or in natural caves in hilly areas. In due course of time, permanent residences called viharas or monasteries were built for them. Most of the viharas were built with voluntary contributions by those who had either converted or supported Buddhism. Sometimes, the land and building material was also donated by the rich merchants. The earlier viharas were made of wood and then of brick. In Western India, viharas are cave structures cut into rocky hillsides. Some of the monasteries grew into great centers of learning. During the course of time, Buddhism spread to many parts of the subcontinent.
I hope that you have enjoyed the video and also understood the chapter. But in order to have a crystal clear concept, I am thinking to show one more videos. Okay, so let's begin.
Jainism, the last and 24th Tirthankara of the Jainas, Vardhaman Mahavira, also spread his message around this time, that is, 2500 years ago. He was a Kshatriya prince of the Lichavis, a group that was part of the Vajji Sangha, about which you read in chapter 5. At the age of 30, he left home and went to live in a forest. For 12 years, he led a hard and lonely life, at the end of which he attained enlightenment. He taught a simple doctrine: men and women who wish to know the truth must leave their homes. They must follow very strictly the rules of ahimsa, which means not hurting or killing living beings. All beings, said Mahavira, long to live. To all things, life is dear. Ordinary people could understand the teachings of Mahavira and his followers because they used Prakrit. There were several forms of Prakrit used in different parts of the country and named after the regions in which they were used. For example, the Prakrit spoken in Magad was known as Magadhi. Followers of Mahavira, who were known as Jainas, had to lead very simple lives, begging for food. They had to be absolutely honest and were especially asked not to steal. Also, they had to observe celibacy, and men had to give up everything, including their clothes. Jainism. It was very difficult for most men and women to follow these strict rules. Nevertheless, thousands left their homes to learn and teach this new way of life. Many more remained behind and supported those who became monks and nuns, providing them with food. Jainism was supported mainly by traders, farmers who had to kill insects to protect their crops, found it more difficult to follow the rules. Over hundreds of years, Jainism spread to different parts of North India and to Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. The teachings of Mahavira and his followers were transmitted orally for several centuries. They were written down in the form in which they are presently available at a place called Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. See map 7, page 105. The Sangha. Both the Mahavira and Buddha felt that only those who left their homes could gain true knowledge. They arranged for them to stay together in the Sangha, an association of those who left their homes. The rules made for the Buddhist Sangha were written down in a book called the Vinay Pitak. From this, we know that there were separate branches for men and women. All men could join the Sangha. However, children had to take the permission of their parents, and slaves that of their masters. Those who worked for the king had to take his permission, and debtors that of creditors. Women had to take their husband's permission. Men and women who joined the Sangha led simple lives. They meditated for most of the time and went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. That is why they were known as bhikkhus, the Prakrit word for renouncer, beggar, and bhikkhunis. They taught others and helped one another. They also held meetings to settle any quarrels that took place within the Sangha. Those who joined the Sangha included Brahmins, Kshatriyas, merchants, laborers, barbers, courtesans, and slaves. Many of them wrote down the teachings of the Buddha. Some of them also composed beautiful poems describing their life in the Sangha. List at least two ways in which the Sangha described in this lesson was different from the one mentioned in chapter 5. Were there any similarities, differences? First, both the Mahavir and Buddha felt that only those who left their homes could gain true knowledge. They arranged for them to stay together in the Sangha. Sangha is the association of those who left their homes. Second, there were many rulers, men and women, who joined the Sangha led simple lives. Similarities: women, slaves, and children, kamkaras, had to take permission to join Sangha. They could not participate in Sangha without permission of their husbands, masters, parents. The word Jaina comes from the term Jina, meaning conqueror. Why do you think the term Jina was used for Mahavira and Bhikkhunis? This term was used for Mahavira because at the age of 42 he attained the highest spiritual knowledge. Therefore, he is called the Jina or conqueror of self. Monasteries. To begin with, both Jain and Buddhist monks went from place to place throughout the year teaching people. The only time they stayed in one place was during the rainy season, when it was very difficult to travel. Then their supporters built temporary shelters for them in gardens, or they lived in natural caves in hilly areas. As time went on, many supporters of the monks and nuns, and they themselves, felt the need for more permanent shelters, and so monasteries were built. These are known as viharas. The earliest viharas were made of wood and then of brick. Some were even in caves that were dug out in hills, especially in western India. A Buddhist text tells us, just as the waters of rivers lose their names and separateness When they flow into the mighty ocean, so are Varna and ranks and family forgotten when the followers of the Buddha join the order of monks. Very often, the land on which the vihara was built was donated by a rich merchant or a landowner or the king. The local people came with gifts of food, clothing, and medicines for the monks and nuns. In return, they taught the people. Over the centuries, Buddhism spread to many parts of the subcontinent and beyond. You will learn more about this in Chapter 9. The system of ashramas. Around the time when Jainism and Buddhism were becoming popular, Brahmins developed the system of ashramas. Here, the word ashrama does not mean a place where the people live and meditate. It is used instead for a stage of life. Four ashramas were recognized: Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanprastha, and Sannyasa. Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya men were expected to lead simple lives and study the Vedas during the early years of their life, Brahmacharya. Then they had to marry and live as householders, Grihastha. Then they had to live in the forest and meditate, Vanprastha. Finally, they had to give up everything and become sannyasin. The system of ashramas allowed men to spend some part of their lives in meditation. Generally, women were not allowed to study the Vedas and they had to follow the ashramas chosen by their husbands. In what way was the system of ashramas different from life in the Sangha? The system of ashramas were the different stages of life men had to live. It allowed men to spend some part of their lives in meditation. Women were not allowed to read Vedas and they were bound to follow the ashramas chosen by their husbands. Sangha was an association joined by both men and women. What are the varnas mentioned here? The varnas mentioned here are Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Were all four varnas allowed to participate in the system of ashramas? No, Shudras were not allowed to participate in the system of ashramas. Elsewhere, find Iran in your atlas. Zoroaster was an Iranian prophet. His teachings are contained in a book called the Avesta. The language of the Avesta and the practices described in it are very similar to those of the Vedas. The basic teachings of Zoroaster are contained in the maxim, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Here is a verse from the Zend Avesta. Lord, grant strength and the rule of truth and good thinking, by means of which one shall create peace and tranquility. For more than 1,000 years, Zoroastrianism was a major religion in Iran. Later, some Zoroastrians migrated from Iran and settled down in the coastal town of Gujarat and Maharashtra. They were the ancestors of today's Parsi. The story of the Buddha. Siddhartha, also known as Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, was born about 2500 years ago. This was a time of rapid change in the lives of people. As you saw in Chapter 5, some kings in the Mahajanapadas were growing more powerful. New cities were developing and life was changing in the villages as well. See Chapter 9. Many thinkers were trying to understand these changes in society. They also wanted to try and find out the true meaning of life. The Buddha belonged to a small Gana known as the Sakya Gana and was a Kshatriya. When he was a young man, he left the comforts of his home in search of knowledge. He wandered for several years, meeting and holding discussions with other thinkers. He finally decided to find his own path to realization and meditated for days on end under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar, where he attained enlightenment. After that, he was known as the Buddha or the Wise One. He then went to Sarnath near Varanasi, where he taught for the first time. He spent the rest of his life traveling on foot, going from place to place, teaching people, till he passed away at Kusinara. The story of the Buddha. The Buddha taught that life is full of suffering and unhappiness. This is caused because we have cravings and desires which often cannot be fulfilled. Sometimes, even if we get what we want, we are not satisfied and want even more or want other things. The Buddha described this as thirst or tanha. He taught that this constant craving could be removed by following moderation in everything. He also taught people to be kind and to respect the lives of others, including animals. He believed that the results of our actions, called karma, whether good or bad, affect us both in this life and the next. The Buddha taught in the language of the ordinary people, Prakrit, so that everybody could understand his message. What was the language used to compose the Vedas? Sanskrit. He also encouraged people to think for themselves rather than to simply accept what he said. Let us see how he did this. Do you know? The stupa at Sarnath. This building, known as a stupa, was built to mark the place where the Buddha first taught his message. You will learn more about stupas in Chapter 11. The story of Kisa Gautami. Here is a famous story about the Buddha. Once there was a woman named Kisa Gautami whose son had died. She was so sad that she roamed through the streets of the city carrying the child with her, asking for help to bring him back to life. A kind man took her to the Buddha. The Buddha said, "Bring me a handful of mustard seeds and I will bring your child back to life." Kisa Gautami was overjoyed and started off at once. But the Buddha gently stopped her and added, "The seeds must come from the house of a family where nobody has died." Kisa Gautami went from door to door, but wherever she went, she found out that someone or the other, father, mother, sister, brother, husband, wife, child, uncle, aunt, grandfather, grandmother, had died. What was the Buddha trying to teach the sorrowing mother? Everyone in the world has sorrows, and no one in this world is immortal. Upanishads. Around the time that the Buddha was preaching, and perhaps a little earlier, other thinkers also tried to find answers to difficult questions. Some of them wanted to know about life after death. Others wanted to know why sacrifices should be performed. Many of these thinkers felt that there was something permanent in the universe that would last even after death. They described this as the Atma, or the individual soul, and the Brahman, or the universal soul. They believed that ultimately both the Atma and the Brahman were one. Many of their ideas were recorded in the Upanishads. These were part of the later Vedic texts. Upanishad literally means approaching and sitting near, and the texts contain conversations between teachers and students. Often ideas were presented through simple dialogues. Most Upanishadic thinkers were men, especially Brahmins and Rajas. Occasionally, there is mention of women thinkers such as Gargi, who was famous for her learning and participated in debates held in royal courts. Poor people rarely took part in these discussions. One famous exception was Satyakam Jabala, who was named after his mother, the slave woman Jabali. He had a deep desire to learn about reality, was accepted as a student by a Brahmin teacher named Gautama, and became one of the best known thinkers of the time. Many of the ideas of the Upanishads were later developed by the famous thinker Shankaracharya, about whom you will read in class 7th. 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Over centuries, India's intellectual exploration of truth has come to be represented by 6 systems of philosophy. These are known as Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, and Vedanta or Uttara Mimamsa. These 6 systems of philosophy are said to have been founded by sages
Kanad,
Gautama, Kapila, Patanjali, Jaimini, and Vyasa, respectively. These philosophies still guide scholarly discourse in the country. German-born British Indologist Friedrich Max Müller has observed that the 6 systems of philosophy were developed over many generations with contributions made by individual thinkers. However, today we find an underlying harmony in their understanding of truth, although they seem distinct from each other. The Wise Beggar. Here is a dialogue based on a story from one of the most famous Upanishads, the Chandogya Upanishad. Shaunaka and Abhipratarin were 2 sages who worshipped the universal soul. Once, as they sat down to eat, a beggar came and asked for some food. "We cannot spare anything for you," Shaunaka said. "Learned sirs, whom do you worship?" the beggar asked. "The universal soul," Abhipratarin replied. "Ah, it means that you know that the universal soul fills the entire world." Yes, yes, we know that. The sages nodded. If the universal soul fills the whole world, it fills me too. Who am I but a part of the world? The beggar asked. You speak the truth, O young Brahmin. Then, O sages, by not giving me food, you are actually denying food to the universal soul. The sages realized the truth of what the beggar said and shared their food with him. How did the beggar convince the sages to share their food with him? Beggar convinced both sages that denying him is to deny the universal soul to whom they worshipped. After listening to him, they realized their mistake and shared food with him. Panini, the grammarian. This was also the time when other scholars were at work. One of the most famous was Panini, who prepared a grammar for Sanskrit. He arranged the vowels and the consonants in a special order and then used these to create formulae like those found in algebra. He used these to write down the rules of the language in short formulae, around 3,000 of them.
Thank you students for watching the video, and if you have doubt or something you can directly call me up, and theoretically I will explain you in the class also. Please do come in the live classes, and if you have doubt or something directly call me up. Thank you, bye bye.